If you were here last week, you know we talked about this thing that is so involuntary we forget we're doing it, breathing. We talked about other things that are just as involuntary, such as faith, hope, love. They just are. It is the allness and isness of the divine. We talked about life and living every breath more deliberately. And I said that in those moments that we think life somehow takes our breath away, whether it is out of fear or pure exhilaration, surprise, isn't the truth with a capital T more that we've just missed this now moment of life? And that life isn't necessarily a part of us that we are breathing, but life is breathing us. We also talked about inspiration, and I shared with you my definition of inspiration, which is the thought or idea that always reconnects us with that divine presence, that energy, that power of the now moment. And then I gave you a little physics exam when I talked about argon gas and how we breathe it in. It attaches to nothing. It needs not attach to anything. It needs not anything else to survive or to be. We breathe it in, and it escapes with our exhale. And it has been doing so throughout the generations. And every breath that we take is a breath that Marie Antoinette or Da Vinci or Jesus or the disciples, so many master teachers who have walked this planet, have at one time breathed. And our next breath is a part of theirs, and our next breath is a part of all that will follow in our steps. Funny thing, this last week, no less than 5 of you emailed me and said, you know, I Googled that argon gas thing, and you were right. Here's a little secret. Ministers have Google too. Today, I want to take you on one final journey, the journey to now. You probably know what now means, or at least you think you do, but if you know me, you know that I like to dissect words and sentences a little bit, right? I am a lover of this English language that we speak, and interestingly enough, last week, when Dee emailed me and asked if I could spend one more week with you, because I am not in charge of my own calendar, I quickly texted my assistant, and I had her check the calendar. She texted back one word, Nike, which means just do it. Imagine someone who has lived with me long enough to have now spoken a whole nother language. Have you ever noticed that we are often using up all of our present now moments being somewhere else in mind? This now moment, you may be thinking about what happened yesterday or what's going to happen tomorrow. We often waste a lot of moments feeling guilty about the past, having regrets about the past, or anticipating what we think is going to happen in the future. And what's happening in those precious moments that are escaping us is we are living and talking about and understanding at a deeper level this dilemma that suggests that we are actually either in a moment of depreciation or appreciation. Appreciation lives in this now moment. It's the only place it can live. But when we are not in it, we have just depreciated that valuable resource, even that breath. There is certainly a thing that we call the past, and this thing we call the future. but I will ask you to just examine in your life if it's true with a capital T that either of those exist. If so, I'd love for you to bring me some evidence. Because all that I can find evidence of is this now moment. And we have been talking about the benefits of living in this moment throughout time from a philosophical, spiritual, and religious culture and tradition. But just recently, science has finally caught up with us. In 2009, there were two Harvard psychologists who began a 2-year study. It was called the, let me find it in my notes, Track Your Happiness Study. And what they did was they gathered about 2,500 volunteers, and they put on their smartphone an app that would register them for several weeks, even months, some of them, questions and surveys where they could send out a question at any given moment and ask, what are you doing right now and how do you feel? They thought they were tracking happiness. They wanted to know how many times happiness showed up in any given moment, any given day of one's life. But that survey, that study, took quite a turn. Because what happened was they discovered that people were spending nearly half of their waking hours thinking about something other than what they were focused on in that moment. Matter of fact, the number that came back was 46.9% of their waking hours. They were focused on something other than what they were doing. And they went on to say that they were unhappy in that moment. They began to gauge what they were doing. Resting, sitting in front of their home computer, working, and all of it equated to what they put into their conclusion of that study. They were feeling miserable. We get that about the work thing, right? But you would think resting would be nice. I happen to live for Sunday naps. But what they found was that the only time people were in the moment fully and happy was when they were talking with a friend, when they were praying or meditating, and something I did not share with first service, when they were having sex. Interestingly enough, 90% of the time they were having sex, they were happy. Several of you have just looked at your partners and say, I live with the other 10%. But you know, that study showed a lot of things, and they concluded that reminiscing or thinking about the past and anticipating the future took everyone out of this now moment and equated to unhappiness, a moment of no joy. Last week, we talked a little bit about this practice called mindfulness, which is the energy that helps us recognize the conditions of happiness that are already always present in our lives in any now moment that we are breathing. We can get there through prayer, through meditation, through becoming still, just taking another deep breath and centering. One of my favorite authors, Eckhart Tolle, once wrote a book called The Power of Now. Anyone ever read it? Oh, good. I'm talking to the right group. He talks about that now moment, as he calls it. And he always capitalized now, N-O-W, all of the letters. And he said that there was never a time when your life was not now. And there will never be a time in your life otherwise. He went on to say, end the delusion of time. End the delusion of time. Because time and mind are inseparable. Remove time from the mind, and time stops until you choose it again. You know, to be identified with your mind is to be trapped in time. When you are thinking about something so heavily. You're not in this moment. You're thinking about what just happened or what you're going to do. And those scientists who have been studying time and our thoughts and brain patterns and brain waves have come to understand that it is through our memory of the past and our anticipation of the future that we are unwillingly no longer honoring present moments within our life. Lots of present moments. 50% of the present moments. We have a saying in our culture that time is precious. But Eckhart Tolle says time is not precious because time in itself is an illusion. He says, what you perceive as precious is not time, but the one point that is out of time, which is the now. He goes on to say, when you're focused on time, whether it's past or future, you only miss the now. It's the only thing that is. I got out my fancy-dancy dictionary this last week, and I began to look up the definition of now. How would you define now? This moment, right? Right now. Guess what? We've been wrong all this time. The dictionary says that now, are you ready for your mind to be blown? Now is the time immediately before this present moment. Now is the time immediately before this present moment. I'm going to let that settle in for just a minute. But you know, I've been talking for several weeks about thoughts. I've said over and over that we have a thought that falls into our brain and then the body follows. The same with the now. We have a thought and then the now manifests. We have an inhale and then an exhale. We have a thought that in the now moment, in this next now moment, I'm going to fill in the blank. Think about how many times you've said, oh, I was thinking of them just now. Well, you were thinking before it was now. One of my favorite chapters in Eckhart Tolle's book is called Nothing Exists Outside the Now. He says, nothing ever happened in the past. It only happened in the now. Nothing will ever happen in the future. It will only happen in the now. And what he and other scientists have understood is that we have what's called a memory trace. We think that we are understanding our past, but really it's just this memory trace where we're understanding a now moment that happened. The same with the future. We like to plan for and worry about and stress out about what's going to happen. But really what we're doing is coming into the awareness that that's an imagined now. That's an imagined now. I told Dee that I was going to bring a very sacred text with me today and share it with you. Not that the Bible isn't holy and sacred, but there are times when other beautiful texts can be shared. So I brought with me one of my favorite books. I don't know that there's been a better author on this planet than Dr. Seuss. Interestingly enough, he was born and raised in a town called Springfield, Massachusetts. And he lived most of his life being a writer, an ad man. He wrote political commentary as well as cartoons. He went to war and did just that. He wrote columns for Saturday Evening Post and Life magazine. And he spent a lot of his time out of his now moment because he wished he were doing something else. Though he spent 15 years being an ad man, he really wanted to be a children's author. But every day he would go to work for hours and hours and hours doing what he didn't want to do, missing his now moments. So he sat down and did write a children's book, and he sent it to 27 different literary agents. And he got rejection letters from 27 different literary agents. He was really down and out about it, and one day he was walking down the street coming back from yet another rejection, and he had the manuscript in hand, and he met a stranger on the street, and the man said, "Why are you so down? What's happening? What's going on?" He told him the story, and that man said, "Well, interestingly enough, I work for Vanguard Press. I'm an editor. Let me see your manuscript." And the rest is history. He ended up writing 44 best-selling children's books. He had multiple awards after his name. You remember lots of those books: Cat in the Hat, Green Eggs and Ham, Fox and Socks, How the Grinch Stole Christmas. He ended up having his books translated into 15 different languages, and he sold over 250 million copies. He became a millionaire once he got into his now moment, figured out what he wanted to do, and just did it. He ended up winning 2 Academy Awards from his films, 2 Emmys, a Peabody, and the Pulitzer Prize. His final book, however, is my favorite, Oh, the Places You Will Go. He wrote this at the very last moment of his life. It's his last book in his last year of life. You remember some of the words. You have brains in your head, you have feet in your shoes, you can steer yourself any direction you choose. You're on your own and you know what you know, and you are the one who'll decide where to go. I thought I would read this to you this week. So as I was leaving Springfield last week, I got on my iPhone and I ordered a new copy. I have several, but they're pretty worn. And I thought I'll stand up here and read it and give a short sermon on this book. What I didn't know is, because I couldn't see what I was really doing on my phone, I ordered the pop-up version. So I'm not going to read the entire thing because I can't find all the words. They're located under things. But I do want to read one of my favorite pieces. Imagine my surprise, right? I want to read one of my very favorite pieces of this book. It says, "You will come to a place where the streets are not marked. Some windows are lighted and mostly they're dark. A place you could sprain both your elbow and chin. Do you dare to stay out or do you dare to go in? How much can you lose? How much can you win? And if you go in, should you turn left or right 3/4, or maybe not quite? Or go around back and sneak in from behind? Simple it's not, I'm afraid you will find, for a mind maker upper to make up his mind. For there are people just waiting for a train to go, or a bus to come, or a plane to go, or the mail to come, or the rain to go, or the phone to ring, or the snow to snow, or waiting around for a yes or a no, or waiting for their hair to grow. Everyone is just waiting for the fish to bite, or waiting for wind to fly a kite, or waiting around for Friday night, or waiting perhaps for their Uncle Jake, or a pot to boil, or a better break, or a string of pearls, or a pair of pants, or a wig with curls, or another chance. Everyone is just waiting. And you can get so confused that you'll start in to race down long wiggled roads at a breaknecking pace. And you'll grind on for miles across weirdish wild space, headed, I fear, toward a most useless place called the waiting place. I love that part of his book because though that entire story, all of his stories, are fun and inspirational, kind of airy-fairy. They also share something deeper that we all know at a conscious level. When he talked about the waiting place, he was talking about a part of our journey that is often silent. How many times have you sat in the doctor's waiting room, waiting and waiting, but you're not really there? You're thinking about all the things you could be doing if you weren't there. You're totally somewhere else. That waiting place is not an active place. It's a time where we give birth to our dreams. It's where we go inward and come into alignment with our guidance. But it's because we ask the questions, just as Joe just sang. What am I here for? Ever been in the doctor's office and wondered, what am I here for? Because you always feel better the day you go there, right? But just as that study from Harvard suggested, where we give ourselves permission to that divine energy that's being made manifest in us in any given moment, we can stop it or we can help it come into fulfillment by getting into this present now moment, by coming fully aware and alive in this moment. Dr. Seuss ended his book with these words. And will you succeed? Yes, you will indeed. 98.75% guaranteed. I was really mad that he put those words. I wanted at least 99%. I wanted a guarantee that was so close to 100, but he said 98.75%. Interesting, huh? Dr. Seuss was 87 years old when he died. That last year of his life, when he wrote his most famous of all books, was a year in his life that he was suffering the most. He had developed throat and oral cancer, and it was a painful several months when he was dying. Interestingly enough, we pronounce his name Dr. Seuss, but he always pronounced his name Dr. Zeus, because he said it rhymed with voice, and he wanted to be the voice that brought joy into life. And it was the voice that he lost during those last months of his life. And yet is the voice that continues to live on through the argon that he breathed and that we are breathing, the words that he wrote that we continue to read. I've often wondered if he was writing that book for children, for adults, or for himself. Oh, the places you will go, knowing that he was about to leave this earthly plane. There's an interesting historical figure that I've been studying for quite a while. Her name is Julian of Norwich. Anyone ever heard of her? All right, there's 3 smart people in the room. Julian of Norwich was a 14th century Christian mystic. She lived in England, and she was what we call an anchoress. And if you want to Google, because I know you have it, if you want to Google Julian of Norwich, you're going to find what anchorists and anchorites are all about. It was kind of like our present-day nuns and monks. They would come apart, go away for a while, maybe even a lifetime. And when Julian took her vow, if you will, she went into what they call a cell, which is just a large room that they actually build for an anchoress or an anchorite. They build it on the side of a church, and it is one room that they will live in for the rest of their life. They can't leave it. They have a window that faces to the inside of the church where they can be part of the services that are held there, and a window that faces the outside world where they can see it, but they can't be a part of it. Julian of Norwich lived in that cell for almost 60 years. She lived through wars that were going on all around her. She was cared for by the people in the village that would bring her food to that window. She was cared for by a maid of the church. She was cared for by what she called a divine energy. She ended up writing about what she called visions. She said she had 13 different visions of Jesus the Christ and his suffering and his pain. But when she began to write about it, she didn't see what she would call sin or hell. She saw only heaven and love. She wrote a book called The Revelations of Divine Love, and it's the first published book in the English language that was ever written and published by a woman. And it was the longest running, we still have manuscripts of it today, that date back to any woman ever writing it. Hundreds of years ago, she wrote the words, "God is love. God is loving. Therefore, love must be God." She said, "I don't believe in sin or hell as we have taught in religious circles. I don't believe in a wrathful God. I believe in one that is good." And then she wrote something really interesting. "I don't believe that God has a gender, but if it does, I believe it is more mother-like than father-like." Sound familiar? Her theology was unique in many respects. And over the last several weeks, I have been bringing you a bit of verbiage, terminology that we have looked at, studied, you've thought about throughout the weeks and even over the course of several weeks. We started with a word called from grief to grace. We said that from is our source. We looked at the grief that was present in our own individual lives and the collective body of this congregation. We looked at the word to, realizing that to is the same as from. We're always coming from source and always going back to it. And it is all because of that last word, grace. Always available, always present, always there, just as the breath, just as faith, just as love, just as hope. It just is. Grace just is. Our scripture today from the Psalms says, "This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it." I've always thought that particular scripture was just a little Seussish. You remember in the movie, in the book, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, that 6-year-old little girl named Cindy Lou Who? She was the star. She really got it, that every day for 364 days out of her year, she was looking forward to one special day. And she understood that there was this man, this creature, who she wanted to understand all the more why he wasn't invited to the party. So she did everything in her powers to get to him and invite him to the moment. She raced up the mountain, she slid down sewer pipes, she did all of that stuff in the movie so that she could bring the Grinch to the jubilation, a moment of rejoicing and being glad, to come into this moment with me and experience it fully. You know, I told you today about two very different people, Dr. Seuss and Julian of Norwich. Complete opposites, male and female, one a children's author, one a theological author. One who wrote based on joy and inspiration, one based on suffering and isolation. And yet they are the same story. Everything is the same story because everything is a story. Whatever story that you're telling in this present moment is the story of what's going to happen in the next. As I have mentioned to you over the last weeks, we come all the more into alignment and awareness when we are in this now moment, that those who have gone before us, and when we are in our deepest moments of grief, we can understand that though they are missing from a physical aspect, their spirit, their breath, the very air that they breathed is still a part of us in this now moment. and they will forever be that. This now moment is all there is. It's the only thing that exists. There's no past, there's no future. It's just this moment. And make no mistake about it, the moment that you strive to live completely in this now present moment is really just to strive for what already is the case. Because it's going to happen whether you're there or not. And reality is always a little more gentle than the story we tell about it. Reality is always a little more gentle than the story we tell about it. You've had experiences in your life when you've worried and fretted and stressed out about something that may happen tomorrow or next week or next month. And when it comes, when that now moment shows up, it's usually a little easier than what you told. You know, the first time I ever met Sue Baggett-Spears was months after I'd known you. And I went to her house, and I was running a little late. And the first words she said to me were, "Don't worry about it. Time is my friend." I've used her words with grief clients ever since. I've used her words as a mantra in my life. Time is my friend. Because any spiritual, developed, mature presence on this planet has understood that time is an illusion. And the choice is you can either make friends with it or it becomes your enemy. That mantra and her weeks of coming apart, going away for a while, has been her journey to now. And I think that our journey to now, you and I've grown so fond of you. And I remember not very long ago, I was standing in front of an organization where I was speaking and doing some training for a week-long training project where they were hiring and firing, trying to grow their business on a new level. I talked about getting into the now moment because they were so attached to the past and so attached to what they wanted their business to look like, they were missing what was happening right here and right now. Developing a model, a ministry, an understanding that until you are in this now, neither of those things will ever be anything other than your story. And when I left after that week-long series with them, I drove out of the parking lot and I saw this sign. Now hiring now. Right now, we're hiring now. I think they got it. I think you get it. Our journey of now is probably best represented by one of my favorite Dr. Seuss quotes. He says this, "We're all a little weird, and life's a little weird, and when we find someone whose weirdness is compatible with ours, we join up with them and fall in mutual weirdness. And we call it love." I love Dr. Seuss. I loved Julian of Norwich. I love you. I love this church, this community, your faith, your hope, your love. I'm going to leave you with something that Julian once wrote, which became one of her most famous quotes. Again, centuries ago. Something that we affirm each and every day in our lives, and certainly each and every week in Unity churches across the planet. She wrote these words, "All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well." Namaste. Thank you. Thank you.